Hello, I'm gonna play around with your image here and see what we can do. So, first off, I want to say it looks pretty good as it is. Um, Maybe if you want to turn this into something that looks finished, you probably want to think about what it's gonna look like when it's finished. So, at the moment, it's just on a stark white background. We're gonna try something um, that's not too difficult, so we'll just go with a flat black background, I think, and maybe try and just make it end a little bit nicely on the black. And I'll show you what we'll do. Let's go. Alright, another thing is, if we're going to turn it into a final image, we probably want to find a nice crop for it. So we'll do something that might look like it could fit on some paper. If you ever potentially want to print this is a good idea as well. With the lines I can see at the moment, they look fairly scribbly. So you want to try and develop some confidence in your lines. At the moment it's got that thing going on, what people call chicken scratchiness, where it looks like each line you're doing is just, it's not really adding anything to it, it's just doing more lines. So this is again a bit of a confidence thing with you knowing where you're going with the lines. It's okay to sort of feel out where you're going, but you want to try and be a bit more deliberate with your strokes so you can develop some nicer lines, and also not get too confused by stuff like when it's getting very busy over here, because while you're developing the image, the bits that you put down in the image are going to be distracting even while you're making the image. So it doesn't just matter about the finished look of it while you're doing it. All these little strokes are going to be confusing you completing the rest of it. Let's see. So I've got a bit of reference on the side here. I just pulled up a couple of images that I thought might be handy, and they don't have to be perfect references, but it's probably a good idea to think about what you're going to need reference wise, and then do a bit of collection after you have a general idea of what you're trying to achieve. So we're trying at the moment to get rid of some of these stark whites because the high contrast is going to be a bit distracting. We want to try and limit the value range to not going pure white or pure black in too many areas. Another thing is you want to be aware of tangents. So if you've got the horn sort of lining up right here and then it's lining up with that part, it's going to be quite confusing because it's just going to look like a donut. So we'll try to make sure that like we're breaking the line here, and then we'll refer to the reference of the horn just to get an idea of how light affects it. And I tried to be a little bit consistent with some of the reference, so I'll just say like this reference here is mainly for the lighting. I just tried to find something that roughly matched what was going on here. You'll see in your image at the moment you've got the light sort of coming from, sort of looks like it's coming from this way, but then because of this shadow here, but then the shadow of his nose is only on that side, which is a little bit confusing as far as your light source. So we're going to try and get a more consistent light source. That's a thing. As far as the shape, you did pretty good. And I don't know in what kind of way you want to sort of stylize the look of your work, or whether that's something you've worked out already. But I'm just gonna play around with it anyway and take it to somewhere where I might go with it next. Immediately I can already see that one problem with the anatomy is the ear is tiny, and that seems to be because you have been allowing room between the horn. So something that can happen is, you try to make everything fit. This can be in terms of getting the head to fit on the page, where you might squeeze a part of the anatomy into the page to try and make it fit. And that can also happen with the features, like getting the whole ear to try and show in front of the as well as the horn, where in this case probably the ear should be a little bit hidden by this horn. So first off, we'll try and get some of the bigger elements working well, and we've got already an idea of what the general bulk of the shape is, so we'll just try and make it fit on the page nicely. So I just did a quick transform there, just change the size a little bit, just sort of block out where the shoulder kind of area might be, and we'll do a bit of like a cut off at the chest area, which you'll see in a lot of art stuff, and it sort of has a nice look to it where you don't want to do the whole body, and maybe it just has a cool aesthetic to it. So you can definitely look at some other people's portraits and stuff and see how they've tackled leaving out quite a lot but making it look like a finished piece. And if you want to turn this into a finished piece, one of the things that you probably want to come to grips with is that it'll take a while. And one of the problems you might encounter is it's not so much a problem with time, but you might be stuck about where to go at all. And another thing is, I don't know if this is a female or male character or some androgynous character, but I just pulled up mostly female reference. I wasn't sure if it was the character in your sketchbook, but we'll just sort of roll with that maybe it is. So we're going to try and get the lighting consistent a little bit, so we'll use this as a reference for the lighting. It's not a one-to-one correct with the angle that you've got here, so we'll try and maintain a little bit of this angle you've got. It can be really easy to lose that when you're using reference and you start getting things one-to-one more than you want. And the solution to that is to either find reference that's good enough that it doesn't matter if you take too much of the one-to-one angle, or to just develop a sense of like how would you turn those shapes in your head to try and match the angle that you want. Okay. So try to avoid too darks, especially if this is like a female character and you're not trying to go with a sort of dark gritty kind of look for her or him. It doesn't matter, him or her. If it's not the feel that you want to go dark with it, then don't go too dark. Simply. Now she's catching a bit of highlights here, so we can get that kind of information in. I'm going to catch like a bit of highlight on the nose, and it's just to push the 3D forms a bit. You got to remember, like, if you're not going for the same shape of features for your character, then you don't want to copy the shadow shapes and the light shapes exactly too of your reference, because then you'll be drawing that face in the reference and not the face that you're trying to draw. Now the eyes, there's not too much shape to the eyes at the moment. It's a little bit more cartoony, and if that's what you're going for, totally fine. Just remember that a lot of people that can do great anime or cartoony stuff also usually have quite a bit of knowledge of real life sort of anatomy, and that's what helps them push things in a way that seems sort of credible, even though it's pushed. So we'll just try and, for my purposes, I'll just get a little bit more of an eye shape in there, which I think is a bit interesting, and we'll give a bit of suggestion that there's some eyelashes there, and then this is going to be a female character, at least in the one I'm doing. I think he did an okay job with the expression. It's a little bit bland as far as an expression goes. It's kind of just like that very fantasy, high fantasy sort of like D&D, like they're just looking to the camera a bit like, you kind of see that in some video games, and that's totally fine. I mean, yeah, those games are for fun. It's supposed to be a bit cheesy, I guess. But, yeah, you can do a lot with sort of giving a bit of attention to the expression that they're pulling and really make it feel more like a character. We'll get some of this. If you look carefully in this reference, you'll see what's happening with the lights here, and that this sort of arrangement of shadows and highlights is what's creating like the 3D forms of this. So if you want to push that side of your work, try to observe reference so that you sort of put together an understanding of what's happening, and you can just apply that to the forms, because it's happening everywhere. You've got the shadow down here, and then you'll see there's a bit of light catching there, and that's because of the bounce light that's happening. It's bouncing off her skin and illuminating that a little bit. But don't mistake this line for being as light as something that's a highlight. It's not. It's comparatively light to the shadow next to it, but it's not a highlight in itself. Okay, so we'll try and push the nose a little bit here. We'll make that a little bit more 3D, and we'll do that just by getting a bit more value variation in there. And we're going to try and match this lighting scheme. And I'm just going to try and get this nose in as far as I can see, like what I can imagine it was supposed to look like. We already can get a shadow in for the hair, because I think we'll keep the hair as you got it, because it looks cool already. Getting a bit of the eyebrow. So part of the trouble with trying to critique this sort of thing is that quite a lot of it's personal, and it's going to be up to whatever direction you're trying to take it in. So I can only be as effective as I'm just sort of approaching it from how I would push it a bit further. Now I got this reference up here just to see like, well, what would be happening if she's got this kind of like snaggletooth going on. So maybe a bit more of her teeth would be there, and she might have that happening. And we can give some kind of lip. Might use something like this little axolotl, just to give some idea of like the kind of color variation we can chuck into the face. And we can look at these lips again to kind of get an idea of the lighting. Even though it's a black and white picture, you can just sort of like, the color's not going to be too important. It's really down to the values that you use. So the dark to light is what really matters more so than color in painting. It's still a little bit unnatural for me to be talking to nobody, and I mean, as far as like just talking and nobody's directly hearing me right now. So apologies if it's a bit weird, because it's weird for me, but I just thought I'd give this a try. I was just gonna do like a quick paint over, but I thought maybe if you see it happening, it might be a bit more informative, so we'll try it that way. Again, we can look at the axolotl, just see what's some nice color variations. Maybe bring it a bit into the blues, and then we can match this sort of, when it gets darker here, just match it to where it's getting darker on our lighting reference, and just try to inject some of that into there. And so you got like something that you've got good here actually is you're getting a little bit of heightened color on the border of this shadow, which is pretty accurate to what you see in real life, so that's a plus. But it's also a cheek, which is probably not going to be as harsh unless you've got very stark lighting. You're probably going to get a softer transition over there because it is skin, which is going to allow some of the light in, and then the light is going to disperse under the skin and allow it to soften up. It's kind of that if you get a flashlight and put it on your hand, you'll see like the light scattering under your hand. And then we can bring back a bit of darkness into that, and we don't want it to be overly saturated throughout. So if you have everything saturated, it sort of loses the contrast between the things that aren't saturated, and so the saturated parts become less impressive, where if you're a bit more selective about what you allow to be saturated, then the parts that are saturated are going to stick out a bit more and be a bit more eye-catching and be a focal point of your piece. Let's see, I want to try and not take too long to do this, but yeah, I want to still try and give you enough of an idea of how you might proceed, but I'll try and be a bit rough so it doesn't go on forever. So again here, we don't want to create like a tangent with the chin. You want to sort of separate so that people know that's where the chin is ending, and the absolute end of the chin is not going to be where it's the darkest. You are going to get usually a bit of like reflected light there, but it shouldn't be as light as that, so we'll knock it back, and we just want it to be lighter in comparison to what's next to it. Shadow under the lip, pretty common. It's pretty safe to chuck that in most times when you're doing your own sort of work without reference, and we get a bit of highlights for the lips, and we can also put something in for the nose just to push the 3D shapes, and the cheeks will also be picking up a bit of highlights as well. Shape of the face is fairly good. Maybe the cheek is a little bit high. Cheekbone, because you want to make sure the anatomy is matching up on both sides as well. so it looks like it belongs to that character. You may want to do like the page flip from side to side, mirroring it to, that can help sometimes, although I'm pretty lazy with that generally. Okay, so the facial features are looking alright now, and we've got a bit of 3D-ness happening. You can push that a little bit more just by by adding that light on top of the dark. It's just pushing it forward. We can do the same here for that part above the lip. Okay, now let's tackle the horns. So you want this thing to look aesthetic even as far as just shapes, and you want to give it some credibility to the anatomy as well. So you really want to think about like, how is this massive horn actually exiting her head? And we won't make it too difficult, we'll just sort of get it to overlap enough there. And then we'll try to make it look like it's the same type of horn on this side. And we'll try and make sure that the entry point looks consistent. You also got to think about the angle of the head. If that horn is going back like that, then at what angle would that be? Maybe it'd be more something that, and then how much would be protruding from there? It's hard to say. Maybe something like that. Okay. We'll just put in a bit of indication about some detail. If you wanted to spend more time, you really look at the reference, and that'll teach you a lot about how to put some details in here. When it comes to detail, the main thing is, if you're looking at the focal point of your image, which in this case will probably be like around the eyes, if you're looking from back here and looking at the eyes, if the horns sort of looked alright from there, then you're not doing a bad job as far as keeping the details loose. If it just looks like it's unfinished when you're looking at the focal point, then it's going to look unfinished, and you probably want to clean that up a bit. But yeah, as far as just appealing shapes go, you also want to have some shape variety. So if this horn was just like the same consistent width the whole way around, it would be pretty unappealing, I think. And it may also not be easy to interpret it as being a horn. So by having a bit of contrast in size going around, that'll make it a more appealing shape. And by getting an idea of where the shadows and the highlights are falling on it, we're going to get an idea of how it is popping out, and we're going to see that this part is coming in front of this part, and we can further embellish that by paying a bit more attention to the shadows. Just like the reflected light that we're getting on the chin, we're also going to get a little bit happening like that on the horn, and then that again is going to make it feel a bit more 3D and pop it from the hair. So we can get away with, if we've rendered up this horn, because that's more so in the front and more of a focal point, then this horn can sort of like sink to the back a little bit more, and we could even like knock it back and that will look fine. Now let's tackle, now that we know what the horn looks like, we can start tackling this ear. So placement wise, if you're tilting the head, the ear's also going to tilt. So this looks like the head is tilting slightly forwards, but the ear is sort of maintaining its position. If you look at this image over here, the ear sort of lines up, you know, around the eye, but I mean this ear just looks a bit tiny. And then we also want the ear to match with that it's mainly in shadow, and maybe like some of it is catching some light over there, and we'll just give it a general idea of what an ear is. Again, if you want to get more detail with this, then look at reference and get more detailed with it. You can definitely pump in more of a value range than what you had previously, and that will give it a nice bit of depth. And although I'm sampling from the pure black, once I put in a stroke, for the most part I'm generally going to dull it down by selecting something that was affected by the black but not the absolute black. And so I collected a couple of bit of hair reference just to get an idea, well, what does it look like when it's flowing down, and what does it look like when it's doing this little, you know, fluff thing at the front. And we'll try as much as we can to keep it consistent with the lighting that we've already established. And for any of these things, if you want to make it look a bit more accurate, you just spend a bit more time with it, as far as the referencing goes, to get it more accurate. I guess we just go with like a brownish color for the hair. If the light's coming from this way, then that's where it's going to be catching. And just treat the hair like a mass, which you've done a good job of already. We might look at this one and, you know, might decide, hey, like it looks kind of cool in the reference like that if she had a bit of it shaved, so maybe we treat that as if it's been a bit shaved there. And that's also going to give us details on another level. So if all your elements in the piece are hanging around the same amount of detail, it can again lack contrast and be a bit boring. So you want to have a variety of levels of detail. So you want to have a bit of a hierarchy there, that some things get the most detail, that might be the focal points like the eyes and stuff, and then other parts get a little bit less detail, but you still have nice things happening, like, you know, this little bit of the hair pops out, and that creates some shapes that warrant you taking a look at stuff. If the image looks overall very simple, it just feels like, oh, you know, once I've taken a single glance at it, I've seen everything, so I don't really need to look further than that. We can also here play up the idea that she's kind of got like this short hair on the side. And then we can darken it up at the part where her head might be transitioning to longer hair. And then from there we can get the hair in, and then we can just get some ideas. You can just sort of like apply strokes that you see in the hair there, and it's more of just a crutch to give you some confidence that what you're painting looks kind of realistic, even if you don't really look at the reference much and follow it. Sometimes it can just be a bit of like a safety blanket that you've got a real picture of hair there to glance at. Try and separate that a little bit so it doesn't look like the ear is just, it looks a bit like the ear is just continuing up there, which is a problem. So we just separate around that. It's not looking too bad. I'm realizing that this horn kind of looks like it's coming in front there a little bit, so maybe I want to change the angle to something like that. But the good thing is, if you're doing horns, that even on animals, like, horns don't always grow too evenly, so it's not such a big deal. But you do want to create nice shapes with it. But you can get away with a lot with that kind of thing. Okay. Because we got control over everything in the piece, we're going to try and make sure that the hair is doing something nice and cool. Maybe we should probably either end the hair before this point or after it. Maybe in this case we'll go before it, so I'll knock it back up here a bit, and we'll try and get it to have a nice sort of flowing shape. But yeah, you can spend as long as you want on this kind of stuff. And don't get too put off by the feeling that you don't know how to proceed with things. That feeling is going to come back endlessly, but you get a little bit better at tackling it, and doing this art stuff is pretty much an exercise in problem solving all the time. So it just gives some kind of idea that her clothes are something. For now, that kind of thing will do. Probably going a bit long with this. Yeah, you can even sort of like cut into these kind of things and just give it some shape, and it doesn't have to completely make sense as long as it looks cool graphically. Okay, what else we need to do? Let's see about the eyes. Maybe the eyes are a part that you want to stand out, so we do a bit more with them. This is the part where we might go a bit lighter to accentuate the eye area, and then something I like to do is just get some reference of like frogs and stuff, and frog eyes and lizard eyes, for this kind of like character to inject something that has a bit of like a otherworldly look to it. You don't have to, you can also just keep them a bit more standard, or do whatever with them really, because it's your image. It's nice to add a little bit of color variation into parts like that. Let's see where we're at. Okay. Just trying to pick up on notes, like what's happening there, visual notes. And doing something like getting a few bits of this hair to be a bit more outstanding, kind of qualifies as hitting a little bit depth of detail. So in the eyebrow you could take out some inspiration from like the first few hairs there being a bit loose, and making that a little bit of a detail feature. The eyebrow maybe not a consistent value, so you could take that away and get that to look a little bit more detailed. Losing some consistency with our lighting if we don't address parts like what's happening under the eye, so we get that in, which also gives us a bit more shape to her skull. And there is, in the reference, you can see like it gets a little bit darker there, and that suggests that the form is turning over a little bit more, so you can get that in as well. Gives her a bit more identity to her features. And again, we get in a bit of that black area and it really pushes forward the shape of her lips. Let me see. So another thing to watch out for when you're rendering is there's a possibility that this is a very common thing. It's not too present in what I see right now from you, but something to be aware of is there's a bit of a trap to be had if you render as if you're trying to color in shapes of light. And what I mean by that is you might go, oh, there's a light shape on the cheek, so I'm just going to color that in like with the strokes following the way this shape is, and that can create that sort of plasticky digital look. So you want to be aware of that and try and give some variety to your strokes, because that will generally make things a bit nicer. Cool. So I might just take a little bit of a visual cue from the way this girl's got like her sort of curled up lips. And it's a nice thing to do to keep observing different people. So you can take away sort of visual notes that you might incorporate into future images. Even that you're aware that this like little lip curl thing is a possibility that happens on real people's faces, then you might employ it in some pictures in the future when the need arises. And then of course, like if we're using this sort of more of her structure from here and we're applying it with this sort of lighting, the lighting's not too different, which is helpful, but you want to be able to adjust this while maintaining the other aspects of the other reference. So that can be tricky. One thing is if she's got more of a smile, you'll see how close her lips come up to her nose compared to this one. And so that's something to look out for. And I don't know if this is gonna work. Sometimes shit doesn't work and you just try it out, and if it doesn't work then you take it back and you Control Delete, because you might as well use the advantages you have with digital. I feel like it's getting a bit dark on that side of the nose, so I'll knock that back to try and stay consistent with the lighting scheme that we got going on. And you can always get into something more dynamic with the lighting and trying to do a backlighting kind of approach. Which if you do tend to do that, just try and take into account sort of the angle of that lighting, and that some parts might not be sort of evenly lit. So especially like things in the hair is like it's gonna catch individual strokes and stuff. So if you've got light coming from that point, you want to try and keep in mind like how different parts of the face are going to react to receiving that light. It won't sort of just be a single line cutting across. And then you can get that light in. Does it look like you might have... I'm not sure if that's what you were trying to go for with that blue there. Maybe not. Maybe that was just blending it in. But yeah, this is just another option that you can do to sort of give your character a little bit of a pop forward. Yeah. Anyway, I think I'll leave it at that. And if you have any questions and stuff like that, I'm gonna try and stop saying shit all the time. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message or something like that. Yeah. Good luck with it, and yeah, hopefully that was some help. Thanks.